Today's episode is brought to you by Slater's 50/50 and the Vegas Beer Guys.
Everything sequel contains explicit language. And why the fudge not, you melon farmer?
Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel Podcast. This is the 1990s singles edition. Gremlins 2, the new batch, is what we're talking about today. My name is Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. Back with me, as always, that badass Brit, you magnificent beast, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Say hello, Tom.
Easy boy. Nice boy. Now listen to me. I could get you diseases. You'd like that, wouldn't you?
I didn't think you were going to go there. I
honestly, I have never had more lines to choose from.
Yeah, I didn't think you were going to go Christopher Lee.
Well, you know, he is a revelation in this movie.
Everyone is. Except the lead characters.
But particularly, I don't think we've ever thought of Christopher Lee as the great comic actor that he proves himself to be in this movie.
That's true.
And they give him all the comedy.
Yeah. Not all of it.
No,
How about Tony Randall?
But his entire part is it's essentially comic relief.
Right.
There is, I mean, there is prior history between him and Joe Dante, which is kind of quite interesting. It makes me think that he was cast for a rather obnoxious reason.
Interesting.
So and it involves sequels, so it's not too much of a tangent. Christopher Lee was in Howling 2,
right?
Which the original was directed by Joe Dante, and then the sequel was taken away from him. And reportedly, Christopher Lee, upon meeting Joe Dante on the set, apologized to him for
doing the sequel,
appearing
right?
in Howling 2.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if many people say that Joe Dante is sabotaging his own franchise here. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because so much care is taken in this project. But I might be persuaded that he cast Christopher Lee out of revenge.
No, but not interesting. Well, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about 1990s Gremlins 2, the new batch, a sequel to 1984, right?
No, yeah, I couldn't believe it was so long before.
That's one of the things that Joe Dante, apparently they came to him for a sequel. What I find fascinating, first of all, is the fact that this movie is directed by Joe Dante at all.
Yeah, it does have the whiff
and he directed.
This was taken into someone else's hands.
Yeah, because he directed the first one, and these are two vastly different movies. And I just love that he was willing to do that, for starters.
Yeah, I think he's basically embracing the fact that people are unlikely to take this movie seriously because it is a sequel, a belated sequel.
And we talked about this idea in our introduction episode, this idea that, if anything, this movie is a meditation on sequels themselves. I mean, he is spoofing sequels, essentially.
From the get-go.
Right.
So I think there's a very conscious choice here to sort of... and I've talked about this before as something that I really like in sequels, is do different for different sake in every single instance.
Well, so I was going to ask you about that, because it felt like in our ranking of these one-off sequels, you were about to rank Another 48 Hours above Gremlins 2, the new batch, and I was fully prepared to give you a lot of shit based solely on what you just said about how much you appreciate doing something completely different for different sake.
But, I still like a degree of coherence in a movie. when I think back to what we talked about before with that, how much I like Superman 3 because it was a very different project from the previous two movies, but it was a
Right.
project. This is a lot of different projects all going on in one movie.
Yeah, coherence is absent from this movie completely, but just to me in the most delightful and delicious
The
ways.
results of the incoherence are so delicious
Yeah.
that there's no. I mean, I'm glad you agree with me on this. I didn't want to have to fight this battle. That if you just look at what is on screen, you cannot say this is not good. But you can say that the movie overall is missing some kind of thread that ties it all together.
Right.
I guess that's Gremlins, but as a
I
concept,
was just about to say. Well, I suppose that thread would be the first movie. But even that feels fleeting in this movie, you know?
I think that is the big difference. Like you say, I mean, we're not going to talk too much about the original, but Gremlins. You ask me what kind of a movie is Gremlins, I'll say it's a dark horror comedy. Right, done.
Right.
You ask me what this movie is generically, stylistically, I could not tell you. I think
you would have to just say hodgepodge.
Well, basically, if someone asked me that question, I gave them the answer, they would be like, okay, you lost me at Hulk Hogan.
Wait, I'm sorry. Start over. Yeah, right. Well, I think what's interesting, too, is because the first Gremlins was like a runaway hit.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie had a $50 million budget, only made $41 million total. USA and the world. So I don't think audiences knew what to do with this movie. But I remember seeing this movie in the theater and just thinking, wow.
It's a riot.
Oh, boy, did you go into a vastly different arena. And I just take a bow because I just loved it when I saw it.
I mean, if you think the original is a Christmas movie, it's set in a small town, there is that kind of like It's a Wonderful Life underpinning,
right?
Which is very attractive. Here, it's like such a savage indictment of the previous decade, economically, socially, that it leaves a really unpleasant taste in your mouth.
It's even a savage indictment of the first movie.
At times, yeah, or at least the pointlessness.
Maybe
of
not
doing a
savage,
sequel.
but maybe it's not a savage indictment, but he clearly listened to all the things that people complained about in Gremlins and said, "Okay, here."
Well, I mean, there are two. While we're talking about it, there are two very specific instances of that. There's a moment where, in the control room of the Clamp office building, a group of tech people, start to give notes on the original movie.
On the original, right? Exactly.
And are bitten to death in retribution.
And it's in reference to the rules.
Right. They basically say, "Oh, what happens if they go into a different time zone?" And
right.
Whatever pre-internet version of those kind of fan reviews are that people said that.
So you have that moment. You have the moment where the Gremlins apparently make the film break, and then you're watching a black and white nudist colony movie, and the usher is brought down to Hulk Hogan, but he's brought down by a woman who walks out of the theater to say, no children should be watching this movie, which was a complaint about the first movie, that it was too dark and too violent.
Yeah.
And in fact, the woman in this movie that comes out is based on a woman that apparently left the movie Gremlins with her child in tow to complain about the movie being too violent and too dark. And the child snuck away from her back into the movie.
Good for them.
And hid to watch the rest of the movie. So you have that moment in reference. And then I think maybe even what my favorite is is it the Thanksgiving Day speech?
Oh God, I mean you're throwing up. I was gonna go next with Leonard Maltin.
Right.
Now here's the thing. I have some personal history here. When I was growing up, I bought Leonard Maltin's book of film reviews, and
Who didn't?
for a good 5 or so years, it was my talisman. It was my film bible. I didn't make a move without consulting this book.
Right. We used to call it the bet settler.
Yes. And I remember, and I, like visually now I can see the page that it's on, Gremlins and Gremlins 2. I remember remarking on, he didn't like the original Gremlins that much, but he gives a really good review to Gremlins 2. That must mean that it's a better movie, because Leonard Maltin is never wrong. At least that's what I used to think.
Right.
And only later did I find out that the reason that he gives the second movie a better review is because he's fucking in it. That's what makes it a better movie for him. He is fucking in it. Talking about how shit the first movie is.
Oh, that's funny.
So that was always interesting to me. That I didn't realize the context of the fact he was giving himself a good review.
Exactly right. So
I mean, normally when you see Leonard Maltin in a movie, he's apologizing for anti-Semitism in a Looney Tunes cartoon.
Right.
So this is a nice departure from that.
Well, and I was just going to say, because Looney Tunes are prevalent throughout this movie, either by sound or by sight. This movie starts off with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. This movie announces clearly what you are about to get into and what you are in store for, which is kind of a stroke of genius, I think.
It's one of the... there's a separate category for the opening of this movie, which is movies where you have forgotten the way that they begin. And it usually involves animation. Right. Grease is the one I'm thinking of. Every time I rewatch Grease, I forget that it begins with a very long cartoon. Up to the point where I am thinking, am I watching a cartoon version of Grease?
And it happens every time.
Every single time. And with this one, it's interesting what you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics in the first second of the movie. It's like, is this okay, so Warner Brothers are the studio. Okay, I got that. Yeah, that's the studio.
I get that.
But this is the Looney Tunes logo. This is not a Looney Tunes, nor is it an animation. Okay. Oh, it's the cartoon before the movie. Okay, that's a time-honored Warner Brothers tradition. Except it's part of the movie release. It's not before the movie, it's in the movie. Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny are arguing with each other. They're talking to the audience. They're talking to the film. Okay, so this is going to be a very self-reflexive movie that talks about itself and to itself. That's the best I can do with that opening.
Oh, well, and best you did do with it. You wrung that towel, my friend.
Because, I mean, we don't get many callbacks to this. Like you mentioned sound, we get the Tweety Bird sound effects when one of the Gremlins gets knocked out.
There's all kinds of sound effects from these Warner Brother cartoons throughout the movie.
Yeah, and we get the whole idea of like it's using the idea of the way that Looney Tunes characters would talk to the animator and like break the fourth wall constantly.
Right.
But that's a very embedded thematic thing or stylistic thing. Mm-hmm. And then Daffy Duck turns up at the end of the movie to kind of tie it all together.
To go Ferris Bueller on us.
I had that exact note. I was like, in the 80s, people...
You're still here?
...really liked to talk to you in the credits in movies. It's just like, it's something that has gone away because I mean, not just now in the time of COVID, but you really are hedging your bets if you think that people are watching this in a movie theater.
Right. Well, and so I got a little tidbit of juicy information for you. I want to know if you knew this. You have this bit between Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck at the beginning, and then you have a soaring shot over New York.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Do you know what that shot's from?
No, but I am willing to believe it wasn't from this movie.
Correct. It's unused footage from Superman 4: The Quest for Peace.
No.
Yes.
And so how consciously do you think that is in there? Because I mean, pretty soon after this, we'll see a clip from Rambo: First Blood Part 2.
Right.
So is it specific? I mean, there must be endless shots of New York you could have used.
Well, that's the
Are
thing.
they specifically going, no, I want a shot from the shittiest sequel that exists?
I can't speak to that. I have no idea. But I do find it delightful.
And wait a minute, they didn't use that shot
Apparently not.
in Superman 4. Like, that shot looks really good. I've got a note about how impressive that looks. There is nothing that good in Superman 4.
I have a note about how good it is. That's great.
Well, I was just like, hey, that's a pretty impressive shot. That just goes to prove the previously stated theory that there is a good Superman 4 that it was entirely left on the cutting room floor.
You keep pitching that, and I don't think
You're not buying it?
No, I don't think an hour more of that movie is gonna help at all.
If it was if the whole movie is just an aerial shot of New York.
Yeah. You are forgetting that they ran out of money. So I think whatever was cut for a reason.
Oh yeah, and I guess we can't go back at this point.
So, but you know what I do? So the other thing that I just find completely fascinating about this movie, we are in a bizarre time right now where Donald Trump is the leader of this country. And when you go back to movies of this time, Home Alone 2, this movie, I mean, there are countless examples of characters based on Trump. This is how much this man has been in our consciousness. Now, this particular character is every bit as much Ted Turner as he is Donald Trump, but
yeah, absolutely.
But I marvel at how much this real estate developer he's in our pop culture and for decades. And now running the country.
The character we're talking about is a character called Clamp,
right?
Which is already
not too much of a stretch.
Yeah, it's not a big stretch. He's a property developer synonymous with a famous New York building. When you even the font of the books that you see that he's written,
it looks like
Art of the Deal, and that kind of lettering. So
his name is Daniel Clamp, so even his first name starts with a D. Daniel, Donald. Yeah. It's not,
But aside from that, you know what interests me, and I made a note about this, that an unusually sympathetic character.
You're right.
Because there's a moment about midway through the film where we just kind of see him alone in his office. And he's this kind of tragic figure. He just doesn't know what to do with himself.
He has nothing to do.
And, we know all these things now about Trump, how, his just, the racism, the rampant egotism, the sexual practices, all those things. But this seems to be basically like a small town, like a small town dreamer trapped in a big city
body.
Yeah. Because once he gets the chance to once he gets to engage with the idea of what he calls the traditional community thing, it gives him a sense of purpose and direction. And, we know from our vantage point that is giving Trump way more credit
than he deserves, right?
Trump is not a man who has a character arc.
No.
This character has a way better, more character dimensions than the actual current president of the United States. So it's just interesting, to me that Joe Dante doesn't take the easy route with anything in this movie. But even in characterizing this, what could be this kind of Scrooge-like figure,
right?
The contemporary example would have been Bill Murray in Scrooged,
right?
Basically the same character. He's multi-dimensional, and just kind of, you really feel for him.
Yeah. I think it's a fascinating tightrope that they're able to walk. And more than anything, I think it's based on a really great performance by John Glover. He's just,
Who I feel like has played these characters before, since, all the
he's
time.
so good. All right. I'm going to stop us right there. We're going to take a quick break because otherwise we're going to go on forever. Stay tuned, everybody. We're going to be right back and we'll continue with Gremlins 2, the new batch, right after this. Look, people, we're living in strange times. We know that, don't we? Of course we do. People don't even know what to do with themselves. We're getting stir crazy. Well, get outside and get yourself some great food, I say. You need to go to Slater's 50/50 in Point Loma's Liberty Station. It's time to treat yourself to booze, to beer, to burgers, and more. They have their full menu, people. Their full menu, I say. How many restaurants do you know that are doing that? Most places are doing a quarter of their menu, probably. Some might be doing a half. Maybe a few have got 3/4 of a menu. But Slater's 50/50 has their full menu, including their signature 50/50 patty. It's half ground beef. It's half ground bacon. It's 100% delicious. What more could you possibly ask? Worried about social distancing? Well, it is in place, people. Tables are separated and the staff will always be seen wearing masks. You're out of excuses. Get off your keister and come on down to Liberty Station's own Slater's 50/50. Indoor dining available, outdoor dining available. Bring the family, bring your dog. Come enjoy the normal again. Good day to you. I said good day. And we're back. We're here talking about Gremlins 2, the new batch. Tom, we just spent a great deal of time devoting to how much Donald Trump is in our consciousness and in this movie, but also in our consciousness, certainly at this time and in this movie, is Rambo
Yeah.
and the First Blood movies and its sequels.
Yeah.
And it kind of harkens back to this idea of spoofing back on sequels, you know?
Yeah, it comes out of the gate doing that. This is one of the actually rare instances in the movie where we get a callback to a plot device from the original movie, which is Mogwai watches a movie on TV, or Gizmo watches a movie on TV. He, enacting it out, he saves the day.
Right.
But in the original movie, it was a Clark Gable movie. There was a black and white Clark Gable. I think it happened one night. Something very classic Hollywood for sure. Rambo: First Blood Part 2.
Right.
It's if Gremlins the original is aspiring to be classical Hollywood, or at least looking back that way, then this movie is about the loss of that.
Well, and it's certainly
as represented by Rambo: First Blood Part 2.
Yeah. And the other thing that's fascinating to me is this movie firmly plants itself in the time it's in. It has no interest.
Yeah, and the media culture that it's in.
Exactly right. It has no interest in being viewed in later years with the idea of it could take place at any time. No, it takes place exactly when it takes place.
Yeah, I think that's got to be a deliberate choice. I don't think they were thinking Hulk Hogan would be a timeless cultural figure when they cast him in this movie.
Right.
To appear as himself with jokes that only work if you know who Hulk Hogan is.
Who he is.
And what his reputation was in 1990. Only.
And that's why I had said in our introduction episode this idea of, could you imagine a 15-year-old watching Gremlins 2, the new batch, maybe without ever having seen the original, no frame of reference for anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they must think this is the biggest piece of shit in the world, and yet we're sitting there earnestly looking in their faces saying, no, this movie's great. You don't understand.
Yeah,
So is this a movie just for us, for people of a certain age, or?
it's an interesting question because to me, it's part of it's a movie that is anti like anti 1980s, early 1990s culture.
Hmm.
There's no aspect of culture that goes of the then contemporary culture that goes unmocked in this entire movie, from health food to conglomerates to bad cable versions of good
Right.
movies. Um,
Cable news.
yeah, people being evicted from their homes. So it's all part and parcel with that. And I think there are just one or two moments when you just get too specific with with Leonard Maltin, with Hulk Hogan. These are people. I mean, Hulk Hogan especially. Leonard Maltin is like, okay, he wrote a bad review of Gremlins. That's why we have him in the movie. It's an in joke.
Yeah.
You can kind of explain that pretty easily, even if you don't know. You just go, oh yeah, he was the Roger Ebert or whatever of his moment, or whatever the kids, I don't know, PewDiePie or whoever the Ryan the kid who voiced toys. He's like that, but with movies. With Hulk Hogan, you're like, well, I mean, it'd take a long time to explain why he was so popular, but you could go,
Yeah.
he was
Would,
popular.
yeah,
It's like, why is he in the
it
movie?
would take a
Because
hot
he was
minute.
popular. That's it.
Right.
There is no other reason for him to be in that movie. So there are moments where it just tips the balance completely, where you're like, in retrospect, this is a bad choice because, I mean, I understand having John Astin, TV's Gomez from the Addams Family, in a cameo.
Right.
That makes total sense. This movie is looking, melancholy in a melancholic way, looking backwards about how TV and movie horror has become crap
Hmm.
because of television, because of video. And so when you cast someone like John Astin, when you get an actor like Robert Prosky, who bears an striking resemblance to Grandpa Munster, even before you put him in the Grandpa Munster outfit,
But right, I was just gonna say, even before he gets the makeup on.
playing like a failed 1960s Edward Murrow type,
Hmm.
I like that all fits into the logic of the movie, and Hulk Hogan doesn't. And so there are a few moments where it's like, where it doesn't work and it screws itself because it can never leave 1990 as a movie.
Yeah, right.
But then there are other moments where you're like, oh yeah, well, if you just a little bit of context, you can figure this out. It makes allegorical sense.
Well, and it's interesting too, even in say the choice of casting, like you have Long Duck Dong and Caroline from 16 Candles are both
Christopher
in this
Lee,
movie.
for fuck's sake. I don't know why I used John Astin
Christopher
before
Lee.
Christopher Lee to talk about classic
Right,
horror.
yeah.
You got fucking Dracula. filmed using exactly the same shot that Terence Fisher used to introduce Dracula.
Right.
Stunning.
Yeah.
Absolutely stunning.
And so everything in this movie is framed exactly within the year it takes place in, and that's, not just the decade before it, but because you have Christopher Lee, but there's a reverence. It feels like there's a reverence for what was lost or what we were losing, what we lost in the 80s.
Yeah, and they even talk about colorization of old black and white movies. Mr.
Right.
Wing gets a real estate offer via VHS, and they just say,
Go ahead, keep the TV.
Keep the TV. It's beautifully done.
Also, this is a world where scientists who work in the building go and look for animals downtown in alleyways.
And that was interesting, because two of our buzzwords are, when we talk about sequels, inversions and coincidences.
Mm-hmm.
We get two big ones 10 minutes into the movie.
Big, yeah.
We're suddenly in New York. The first movie was set in a small town. We're now the kids from the small town are now in New York. That's a classic sequel trope, by the way, of transplanting to the big city. And then we get the seemingly irreconcilable coincidence of Mogwai ending up in the same building
In that building.
as his former
Right.
owner.
Right.
But the way that's explained is part of the satire of the movie because it's a conglomerate.
Mm-hmm.
This company has so many different divisions that are all organized within one place.
That Gizmo could go nowhere but there.
Yeah, that's I think
Right.
ultimately the idea. So it kind of plays with both sides of that in a way that I think is actually kind of interesting.
You know, for just a moment, I also want to talk about some of the things that are referenced or that you see in this movie are, I think it's hilarious that they go to a Canadian restaurant where the servers are dressed like Mounties.
This movie is so fucking good at taking what is a casual offhand gag and making it a complete visual reality.
Right.
And the Canadian restaurant where they clean fish at your table becomes that they were like let's not end with this joke.
Right.
Let's end with the joke of a Mountie serving a moose head. And I guess this is where it's like Looney Tunes is maybe the appropriate
maybe it
reference
is,
point because this is like something you get in a Looney Tunes cartoon.
But there's also strange, there are things that I forgot about that I see in this movie.
Everything.
Like when they're at that dinner, there's a Jolt Cola on the table. When they're inside the building and people are trying to get soft serve yogurt, or is it yogurt? But anyway,
Yeah.
it was penguins. And I forgot that there was penguins.
This is the main reason why I don't think Joe Dante was trying to do a number on his own franchise. This is a commonly held belief in fan culture that he's trying to kill off his own franchise here. It's just the care and the detail with which this admittedly unhinged fictional universe is created.
Right.
I don't think you put that effort in. I don't think you have the whole subscript of automated announcements in the building. I would just love to read a transcript of all those announcements.
My favorite by far is when he walks into the restroom and you hear, "Mister, welcome to the men's room."
I think my favorite is, "Your car is old and dirty."
Yeah. Please remove it from the parking lot.
And there's a ton of those. There's a whole sub-film going on with sound effects. We have, every time the doors open, it's the sound of the Star Trek doors.
Yes, right.
They use these stock library effects to beautiful. So I just don't think you put that amount of effort into your filmmaking if you're trying to,
right,
if you're basically trying to do the producers with a movie.
With a movie, right.
Which is what a lot of people think is happening.
Oh, there's no possible way,
Yeah.
because when you see, for instance, a group of animals, you didn't realize how funny a camel running in a hallway is until you see this movie. And it's like a group of animals escaping and this lumbering camel, and I had to stop the movie. I was laughing so hard.
It almost gets to the point where it is in your face, pointless.
Oh, yeah.
The mime artists who are being arrested when he comes out of jail.
I was just going to say the mimes being arrested.
That is linked to nothing, and yet it makes sense within the frame of this strange, anarchic movie.
Tale. Yeah.
I mean, when you it's interesting that you mention, things that you've forgotten. There's a sketch by Key and Peele that I wanted to talk about.
I was just going to bring it up. You can't talk about this movie without talking about that sketch.
Well, it's based on the principle that you've basically, whoever you are, if you've not seen Gremlins 2 for a while, you've forgotten what a batshit crazy movie this is.
Right.
And so the premise of the sketch is that they're writing Gremlins 2, they're in the writer's room, and a Hollywood sequel doctor comes in and makes everyone invent their own gremlin, and everything that they say makes it into the movie.
Right.
Despite the protestations of the head writer. It's hilarious, and then they make a joke about Back to the Future 3, and I'm like, these people are on my level.
Yeah, right.
But afterwards I was like, it's fun. hilarious and true, but it's not the full story. You know, I think I mean,
How do you mean?
I love that idea of like, imagining how all this stuff was invented by in the writing
Got
of it.
into the
But I
movie?
think the writing of
Right.
it was more like, how can we purposefully do something different, strange, and funny with this
Well,
basic
it's funny
template
because,
of a creature that we have?
yeah, that sketch itself makes it seem as though it was haphazard nonsense,
Exactly.
but the movie itself feels more as though Joe Dante. It's interesting because I want to use the word sinister
Yeah.
because I feel like it's appropriate, but it's sinister with humor.
Something that really interested me, and I don't know if people have talked about this before, but I really noticed how sanitized the violence is in this movie compared to the original.
Right.
Like whenever you do see violence, it's kind of like slime and gunge rather than blood and guts.
The gremlin in the paper
Yes.
shredder is kind of a perfect
Yeah,
example.
exactly. And
If you equate that one to the original movie of either the gremlin in the microwave or the gremlin in the
yeah,
blender,
exactly. That's exactly what I thought when I was watching those scenes.
yeah.
But
This one is bent towards comedy
the trade-off is
because like you said it's more slime. In the first movie, you feel like you're seeing blood and guts.
yeah, and it's more
Visceral.
it's more visceral horror. But I think my point is that what Joe Dante does is actually very skillful, where you sanitize the violence and the gore and the horror, but you keep the fucked up weirdness.
Mm-hmm.
You just put it in, and you just have that, and that is something that they carried over from the first movie. There is a fucked up weirdness about this movie that's undeniable. The movie ends with an interspecies wedding.
Yeah.
That is not a family movie.
No.
Whereas, but like, because I didn't want to be like lured into thinking, oh, they're doing what a lot of movies in this period are doing, where they're trying to sanitize their franchise, make it as family and kid friendly as possible. That's definitely going on, at least in the marketing. But you lose nothing of how screwed up this concept is.
Yeah.
Even though
And
what
the
you see is
fascinating
not
thing
that explicit.
And the fascinating thing is that the first movie was rated PG and is one of two movies that gave birth to the PG-13 rating, and this movie is PG-13.
Right. Yeah, it's so
So there's so much at play both in the movie and outside of the movie directly related to what you were just talking about.
and it
that I
still
find
has a really
endlessly
heightened sense of the
fascinating.
grotesque. Like, not all
Yeah.
horror is about gore. That the scene that almost made me physically sick is the microwave with Marge scene. Oh, the woman hosting a cable microwave cookery show. And just the combination of food that she's talking about on
The
top of
bologna.
the gremlins being in that food. It made me
Yeah.
like physically retch. I mean, and that's a satirical comment as well, but it's it's like a scene from Theatre of Blood or something. It's using other things other than bodily violence, to be incredibly grotesque. And I think I don't know if Joe Dante's got the credit for that, but it's why he's such a good director of family and kid movies, like Small Soldiers and those kind of movies,
Right.
because he can pull that off, that trick.
Yeah. He can toe the line.
Definitely.
All right, let's take another break, and then we're going to come back and we'll finish up with Gremlins 2. I have more to say about Tony Randall more than anything. All right, stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back right after this.
I like to think I know something about beer.
But nowadays, even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beer-stinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beers. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we're back. We're here talking about Gremlins 2, The New Batch, the 1990 sequel, directed by Joe Dante. You know, when we left, I said I wanted to talk about Tony Randall, but you know what we should talk about?
What's that?
We should talk about whether or not Phoebe Cates and Zach Galligan even need to be in this movie. Because we've talked about this movie a lot, and we haven't brought them up.
Yeah. Very good question. I'm generally fine with it. I remember thinking, okay, so they're in the big city, but they're talking about how they've moved to the big city and they don't have any money. That's just about all right. It's better than how it happens in Short Circuit 2, for instance.
Right.
You know, I mean...
But they feel a little utilitarian, don't they? Like, they don't have to be
purposefully, there? I don't buy, you know, they try and make a kind of love triangle.
Right.
And I think that falls flat on its face. There's just no room in the movie for any kind of character development from them.
There's no need for that subplot.
I mean, it's related to the fact. It's related to the satirical aspects that you know, his boss is this kind of 80s woman. Like if you Google imaged 80s woman, you would get this woman. Right. But beyond that, it just kind of like that storyline never goes anywhere. The jealousy doesn't feel like it amounts to anything. Where it really comes into its own is in those moments where Joe Dante's specifically making a point about how the sequel fails to recreate the magic of the original.
Right.
That's where they become useful.
Okay.
The Abraham Lincoln story, which we started to talk about.
Oh, it's so pure magic to me that they take this thing from the first movie where her dad dies in the chimney on Christmas night. And you know, a lot of people, I guess, were up in arms about that scene and how dark it was. But I just think it's pure magic, this idea. And it's, you know, Phoebe Cates is so good in the original movie when she's giving that speech. And then she's so great in this movie spoofing that speech.
Well, it's just that idea. It's like, you know, trying to do the same thing again doesn't work, which is such a great metaphor for sequel writing.
For sequel writing,
and
yeah,
as you say, it's really well performed because she's going through it at speed, and you know, everyone is like saying, "No, we really don't have time for this right now. We don't have time for this moment."
Billy,
and they also do it when it comes to, you know, let's remember the rules. Remember the rules. What happens? And
what are they again?
And I think that's a brilliant piece of writing because it's like this is one moment where the characters need to remember something that you also need to tell the audience at the same time.
Right.
So it's and it was full of these kind of, you know, they are utilitarian. They're also there for kind of narrative efficiency.
Sure.
Because you'd have to reintroduce the whole.
But it's funny to me in those moments because when he says, just remember the rules, and she goes, oh, God, the rules. What are the rules again? I'm thinking, how could you forget the rules? I mean, you were flashed by a gremlin while working in a bar. It was a major event in your life.
And we see that again, even though it's not the same gremlin, which is fucking weird.
I know. Just the same exact thing. But what makes it great is her reaction to it. that it happened a second time.
Well, and also, they can be the barometers of how different this movie is from the original. Because at one point, I mean, Phoebe Cates accidentally takes the wrong gremlin home, thinking it's Mogwai.
Yeah.
And her explanation to why she thought it was him is like, well, maybe this is what New York did to him.
Yeah.
Which is such a piece of bullshit explanation. But a self-conscious bullshit explanation. It's like, okay, let's tie it to the idea of small towners moving to the big city.
But all it does is give them, dramatically, story-wise, it gives the Gremlins enough time to go through metamorphosis.
Where I think I remember thinking this, that even though they're here in the movie on a very, very thin premise, the return of the Futtermans is essential.
Yeah, I agree.
Dick Mill. I mean, I don't know. I don't. This movie doesn't have any sequels beyond this point. Maybe it will one day, but I mean, it's unimaginable without Dick Miller. And he goes through, I mean, like, he does develop somewhat in this movie because he's confronting all his kind of past war trauma.
All his demons, yeah, all his PTSD based on thinking he was crazy. And I was also going to say there's a moment where, the Tony Randall smart gremlin lets a bat gremlin loose. Which also, by the way, creates just the Batman logo in a window when he does escape through a window. But he starts, Dick Miller, Murray Futterman, does fight this thing. And you can see clearly that this is one of those first instances of, it's not green screen, but like the green screen equivalent of that time.
Yeah.
Where he has to fight something that's not there. And if you look at his eyes, his eyes are exactly on point to where the creature is whenever they're fighting. It's like the most remarkable piece of acting.
He's like an anchor. He's like a fixed point.
Yeah.
That the movie, and we, they rush them in. It's like, oh, I got a reunion of my wartime buddies. Oh, we'll go to a hotel. It's like, yeah, I know they shouldn't be here, but I'm so glad they're here.
Right, yeah.
So glad they're here.
So glad.
It is interesting how they manage, and we haven't even talked about Gizmo here, and
you know what?
As far as this is one point where even Joe Dante's like, we don't mess with this. Mogwai will do it. Gizmo will do exactly the same thing he did in the first movie.
Right.
We're not gonna tamper with this. We're gonna. We're just going to work on the puppet. We're going to make the puppet somehow even cuter than it was in the original movie, which I did not think was conceptually possible. And yet it is. I also had a note that... mainly because he walks and dances, perhaps. But I just, I've just bowled over by the how adorable that character is. And I like the fact that there's lots of reasons why they went with Rambo as his kind of like persona this time. Mm-hmm. But they even have a line which makes me think it's almost sort of thematically character justified, where they said they just pushed him too far this time.
Right.
And there's a kind of like you see Mogwai's doing a little kind of like a kind of PTSD thing with his
paws,
his head.
like hand up. I'm
sold.
I find it interesting too that in both movies, I have a note here that says, despite the fact that Gizmo, the Mogwai, is so cute and cuddly and kind and generous and nice, he always, when he gets wet, produces some real assholes.
Yeah.
So somewhere inside of him must be a pretty big dick.
Yeah, like Doucher Man.
Right. Yeah.
They're like the Gremlins are like his Doucher Man. Yeah. So I think we were talking about returning cast members, and something which I'd forgotten happened and was really surprised and shocked, and I think it's deliberate, is how they get rid of Mr. Wing. He dies on the news.
Of who?
Mr. Wing.
Oh, yeah.
He dies on the news.
Right.
Not on screen.
He coughs a little and he's gone. Yeah.
I was like Jaws the Revenge level of, you're gonna do that to a major franchise character in the first few minutes of the movie and not even put it on screen?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, that is balls.
I'll tell you.
I mean, the movie can't happen without that.
No, right.
But it does have that kind of feeling of, the actor didn't die, did he? Because I feel bad if that. No,
I hope not.
I hope not as well. Because
You're
what
a
it feels
real
like
asshole
is,
if he
Plan 9
did.
from Outer Space, when Bela Lugosi goes off screen and then you hear that car crash, and it's all because Bela Lugosi filmed one scene and died.
Yeah,
But I don't think that's what's going on.
If he
here,
is dead,
but it feels like that.
if he was dead, then you're a big asshole.
Yeah.
I'll tell you,
even if he didn't.
yeah, right. Yeah, you're an asshole either way.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
just
the
a bigger
joke
one.
that I forgot that made me laugh out loud was when Billy Peltzer gets knocked on the head and strapped into the dentist chair, and a gremlin's going to drill his tooth, and the gremlin says, "Is it safe?"
Is it
Oh.
safe? There's the Wizard of Oz witch melting. There's a whole Busby Berkeley musical number. There is nothing this movie won't do in its referentialness to movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's pretty clear. I mean, in that Key and Peele sketch, they make a big deal of Hulk Hogan breaking the fourth wall,
Mm-hmm.
which is true. But let's face it, that wall is pretty. He's just tipping over a brick at the bottom of that wall that's already been knocked over. By that
This
point.
movie starts with Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny speaking directly to us, so all bets are off.
This. For those of you who don't know, Hulk Hogan talks to the movie in a movie theater
Yeah, right.
after the movie has stopped. While this is one thing where actually this was a very common practice in the 80s. Monty Python's The Meaning of Life has a similar
Uh-huh.
moment where there's a break in the middle of the film and lots of weird stuff happens that's directed out to the audience.
You also kind of have it
So,
in...
it was something that filmmakers were playing with at the time.
Yeah.
I think it's just the Hulk Hogan-ness of it that stands out, not... The rest of it fits perfectly into this movie. The Gremlins doing shadow puppets is, that's like you say, that's what we get from the very first seconds of the movie.
You got Tony Randall. You've got... I want to get back... we're running out of time, but I do want to, just shout out to Tony Randall as Smart Gremlin. My favorite moment in the whole movie when I first saw it, I remember, is he's changed, so he's smart, but he's still a gremlin. So when he's doing the interview with Grandpa Munster,
yes.
or basically Grandpa Munster, and he shoots that gremlin in the face, and he says, "Now, was that civilized? No, clearly not. Fun, but in no way civilized." To me, is just the most magical moment. It's so great.
My feeling about obviously the Tony Randall performance is helpful here, but yeah, both that and the flying bat gargoyle gremlin are things that if you would make fun of in a sequel, and indeed that's exactly what Key and Peele make fun of.
Uh-huh.
But the way they come about in the context of the movie is almost kind of makes it all right.
Mm-hmm.
That it's sort of like, okay, so he took this genetic juice stuff.
And he's smart.
That's how they got the wings, and that's how he's talking.
Right.
Okay.
This is why this one's a vegetable patch.
Right. And it's like, but I do think, there's a limit. And maybe the limit is not only a Japanese man or Japanese American, he seems to speak with an American accent, who is obsessed with taking photographs, which is, classic racist trope of this time.
Of course.
But at one point he says, "I can work a camera. I am a camera."
Yeah, right.
So he's... They've gone one step beyond the racist stereotype and made a Japanese person a human camera.
Right.
It's like maybe when it's tied up with that abhorrent racism, that's not okay. But it's sort of not unexpected in this movie like the anarchy of it almost sells it. It doesn't because it's in line
Because
with
it's
this horrible
racist.
racist trope.
Yeah,
But
right.
and my heart dropped when I saw it because I knew I'd have to take it down.
But then you have the added fact that that actor is Long Duck Dong from 16 Candles, and so you don't like. There's a part of me that is like, is that purposeful?
yeah,
Just to bring that
it's got to be.
character back? You know what I mean?
Well, it's got to be with all the other.
Nonsense and callbacks and.
I think that's probably purposeful. He also, I mean, this guy, this guy suffered for his art. This guy was cast as Japanese Kurus with camera in so many sitcoms and movies.
Yeah, right.
But you know, I'm like, well, maybe that's the limit. I also want, you know, like how close is this movie to becoming an Airplane style spoof? Of the, you know, what this
Yeah.
is this what Airplane is to Airport, or what Blazing Saddles is to Rio Bravo, or you know, Spaceballs is to Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it quite gets there. There's moments when it does, it really pushes the line, but it always just underplays that. I don't know. What do you think?
But it's still attached to its narrative
yeah,
of making sure these creatures don't get out into the world, and that whole part of the narrative
That's
is
right.
still stuck too much to go to that length, I think.
I think
I
I
don't
agree
know.
with you. Maybe that is the difference. But there were when I was watching Leonard Maltin and they're holding up the video of Gremlins, and he's holding up a VHS of
Yeah.
Gremlins. I'm like, this is Spaceballs. We're in Spaceballs.
Yeah.
But there is jeopardy and there are stakes and
Right.
that go beyond that.
Yeah. Well, so I just, we're out of time. So I'll also just say, in closing, I think what this movie is trying to say was it was a little prophetic, because one of the last shots you see is them leaving the building, and there's the C from the Clamp logo
Yeah.
that is sort of like squishing the earth. Like the earth is flattening in this stone structure or iron structure that's outside of the building, which is sort of a metaphor for what's happening in our world right now. The Trump character and his business is sort of squishing the world.
They should probably, in closing, also if they haven't played the Clamp Network
End of the world.
End
tape?
of the World video, if they haven't already done that in 2020, it's probably time to put it on.
It's coming
here.
soon, everyone. Once again, we leave on a downer. Thanks.
Depending on your point of view.
Right.
Clamp was very inspired by that video. It motivated him to do good things.
To tears. All right, that's it for Gremlins 2, the new batch. I mean, there's nothing left to say. If you have a comment, please let us know at everythingsequel@gmail.com, or find us on Facebook, find us on Instagram and Twitter. That's it for Tom Stewart. I'm Michael Shantz. We're going to be catching you on the flip side when we talk about Young Guns 2 coming up next. Take care, everybody.